East or West, they say home is best, but more and more Africans live abroad today more than ever before. However, many will confess that working and living abroad has its challenges. So today we ask, what is it that tops the list of concerns and worries of Africans living abroad? Mr. Nia Kwete, a Ghanaian-born policy analyst and activist, joins us from Washington, D.C. to discuss this issue. Kwete is the founder of the Democracy and Conflict Research Institute. He is also a former executive director of Africa Action and editor at Trans-Africa. In studio are Caroline Nyandong, who lived and worked in the UK after pursuing her studies. Also with us on the show is Mr. Raphael Obonyo, also lived and worked in the US after his studies. Both have since returned home to Kenya and will share with us their experiences living and working abroad. Welcome to Talk Africa. I'm Penina Karibe.
East or West, they say home is best. But many Africans live abroad today more than ever. In an increasingly borderless world, some would argue Africans, like people of all nationalities, are free to go to school, to work, and to earn a living in any corner of the globe where there are better prospects. It's called the search for greener pastures. This is both a good and a bad thing. On the brighter side, studying and working abroad has opened the doors for better skills acquisitions for millions of Africans over the years.
I don't really have a way of knowing what people think when I tell them I'm from Ethiopia, but sometimes you can just tell that they're shocked to see someone doing well, someone who's in college, who is well educated.
With these skills have come opportunities and better livelihoods. In fact, the African diaspora has become an integral part of African economies, remitting billions of dollars back home each year. On the less positive side, though, Africa has continued to suffer brain drain as thousands of highly trained indigenous professionals migrate abroad in search of greener pastures. Sectors critical for Africa's development, such as health and education, have been hit the hardest by this exodus. For some Africans, the search for a better future abroad has ended catastrophically in the high seas across the Mediterranean or the deserts of North Africa. In their desperation, they have become easy targets for international human trafficking syndicates. Yet sometimes the challenge of living and working abroad can outstrip the benefits. It's true some Africans are living their dream abroad, but it's also true that many continue to cite discrimination of all kinds based on their skin color as a major obstacle in their quest for living their dream. So again, like they say, East or West, home is best.
Right, so let's get started. Mr. Kwete, let me begin with you there in Washington and draw your attention to some interesting statistics that since 1990, Africa has lost 20,000 professionals every year. Kenya, for instance, has lost about a third of its skilled professionals. That's about 3,000 professionals every year. In South Africa, 10% of its IT and finance executives have departed in recent years. Shocking indeed. But what are these push factors that are pushing Africans away from their continent?
Well, thank you again for having me on the program. It's a privilege to join you. I think that you ask a great question. In fact, the underlying statistics, if you permit me, I'll even add one to it. A large professional group in the United States are the physicians, doctors from Nigeria, and one estimate has a whole lot of them. So this issue of well-trained African professionals who are leaving Africa and working abroad is an important issue. What is causing that? A whole number of factors. You correctly introduced me as an activist. I look at policy, I look at politics, and my number one issue is democracy and the weakness of democracy in African countries. So you will forgive me when I say that, in my view, one of the push factors in African countries is our weak democracies. These highly trained professionals need a certain environment in which to thrive and to contribute to the countries that gave birth to them, and in many instances gave them their foundational education, even if they had to go abroad. And when they get their qualifications, I feel strongly that there is nothing they would like to do more than serve their countries and make their countries better, but the conditions, especially the democratic conditions, are a challenge also the work conditions, also the salaries. So there are a number of push factors, but I think political and how they are treated and work conditions are a big part.
Right. Rafael, coming to you, you lived and worked in the U.S. Describe for us the atmosphere here in Kenya, politically, economically, socially as well, at the time when you were living for the U.S.
I think by the time I was leaving to the U.S., the situation was quite harsh. I mean, looking at politics, our politics is quite divisive, you know. You have, I mean, it's ethnicized and it's quite charged. Mm-hmm. And then getting employment is also a big issue. Not just in Kenya, but in the continent. 70% of unemployed people in this continent are actually young people. Getting employment becomes extremely tricky because we are not paying attention to things like merit, which is quite important. So you study and even go to the university, but getting a job becomes quite a bit of a problem. And when you get a job, then you are sort of underpaid, you know. You're not remunerated as much as you'd expect in terms of what you need to survive. Mm-hmm. And that's why I thought it would be better to try my luck in the US. And you look at the quality of education also. If you look at our classes here, you'll find that a class would have like even 1,000 people. It's very rare to find a class that has so many people like that in abroad and in the places like United States.
Right. Caroline, what is it that attracted you to the UK?
In fact, when I wanted to leave to go do my master's, my dad had insisted that I go to the States. But for me, because I had friends who had gone to the UK and family who had gone to the UK, I had better knowledge of what I was going to get myself into. And it not being far from home, again, meaning that they can come and visit me, I know as shallow as it sounds, and it was a bit scary for me to leave to the States because the States is a bit far. So for me, those are the kind of things that I was looking into. And then of course, weighing the quality of education and just looking at the universities, comparing them, and also my brothers and sisters, my brothers were actually in a British system school. So
here
for me,
Kenya?
Yes, here in Kenya. So for me, that was just enough for me to make my decision to go to the UK.
Interesting, Ms. Akwata, listening to the reasons, especially for Cara, why she chose to go to the UK. Let's talk about the pull factors then, those things that attract Africans to Europe and America.
Well, yes, there are those, but one of the ones that I think, even if you do some research, it's not talked about a lot, is I think there are some factors that are not just African. Every human individual wants to see the world. Everybody wants to get out of their village. They don't mean to do it for permanently, but go explore and see the world and come back. And you see a lot, and it's not just highly educated Africans. I mean, since I got the invitation, when the program was discussed, I've been doing some research and thinking, and you know that even Africans who don't have as much education as the three of us are trying to get out of the continent. Tragically, many of them are dying in the process. The issue of the Italian border police and trying to rescue people is on my mind. So I want to put that down. But the better education and better working conditions and better standards of living are all pull factors in countries outside of Africa, because as well endowed as Africans are by natural resources and human resources, people, the fact of the matter is that we are less developed than any other continent. And therefore, a lot of people want to go for better education elsewhere and better standard of living. But I also will caution that, you know, like any community, you have people who are more privileged than others. And those of us on the program are some of the most privileged Africans. And my view is that we actually need to be thinking about the vast majority of our compatriots who are not as lucky as we are, the countries that we want to get to, the United States where I am, and Britain and other places. Those countries were built by their forebears, people who took on the hard work and made sacrifices. Previous Africans made sacrifices for us to become independent. We were colonized, a horrible situation. So I think as the current generation, it is our job. Our lives are not perfect. We have challenges, but it's more important to look at what can we do to make our countries much better, so that even Africans who have the universal urge to go see the world will just go and see the world and then come back. So
Right.
we have to focus on what we need to do to make Africa better for the next generation.
Exactly. So, Mr. Kweta here, Raffle, talking about better standards of living, good education, job opportunities. So, for you, when you went to the U.S., was it really the land of milk and honey?
That's the perception that we have before we get there, and people really struggle to get to those places because of what they imagine, that there are enormous opportunities, and most importantly in the United States, that there are enormous opportunities. But once you get there, you realize they're not just so available that anyone can get them. For example, in the US, for you to get a good job as a professional, you need a social security number, which doesn't come in handy. You have to keep running after that social security number. If you are to get any good job, you need to have a driving license, which doesn't come in handy. It's such a challenge to get that. For you to get an apartment, you need to have some sort of security and to show that you can pay apartment for the next so many months or so many years. So you find that many Africans who get there realize that no, it's not a land of milk and honey, and the American dream is not just available for everyone and for anyone, and for many people for that matter. But what normally happens is the challenge of coming back, because there are always expectations created. You see, you've told people you're going to the land of milk and honey. For you to come back, you have to bring back milk and honey. If you don't have milk and honey, you can't come back. So that's normally the challenge.
Carol, I could see you laughing as we was talking about the challenges there in the US. Yeah. How about in the UK? How fulfilling was life for you there?
Okay, I also went with the perception of this thing, going to the land of milk and honey. And when I got there, first of all, there's a lot of culture shock. Because in the UK, things move really fast. So, of course, you've gone into uni, even opening a bank account. It's not as easy as we make it seem here, because you need a letter from the university, because they can't really do a credit check on you. So even getting a mobile phone itself, it's really complicated. So I remember even applying for a job, the first thing that asked me is, do you have UK experience? I mean, you've got all these papers, fine. Do you have UK experience? So it was really a big challenge in that you have to do those jobs that you don't expect yourself to be doing, like, for example, telesales, for you to grow your CV, to get to a job that is a bit adequate. And then you see, when you realize that your peers back at home are actually doing those jobs that they actually studied for, it brings a challenge when you think about moving back, because you think that you've not really gone to the UK, for example, to achieve what took you there, because you're meant to come back here feeling like an achiever, I've come back with money, all these things. So for me, it was the exact opposite of what I expected.
Okay, so Mr. Kweta, interesting listening to Raffle and Caroline talking about their experiences there. We posed that exact question to our viewers out there, what they go through. They're in the diaspora. Some interesting comments. Let me bring some to your attention. We got one from someone called Tunde, and he said, living in Düsseldorf is a pure racist town. I'm guessing that's in Germany. We got another one here. It's horrible. Racism is rampant. And we also got another one from Korosho Mbazi, who wrote and said, to survive as an African in Europe, you just got to be a fighter, and then you will get through it. So, we've had, of course, harrowing tales of, experiences that Africans have gone through in Europe, in America. Why the social injustices against Africans out there in the diaspora?
I think, again, that's a great question, and they are all true. You experience racism everywhere, no question about that. Now, the situation of the racism in the United States is a little complicated because, this country was largely built by slaves, people of African descent, enslaved people. So there is a large community of black people in the United States, and therefore Africans are just, by my estimate, we now have about maybe 4 or 5 million African-born people here and their children, but there are over 50 million African Americans here. So they have been fighting the racism fight for hundreds of years. You only have to listen to President Obama about the debt that is owed to previous black people in this country and what they did to make this country better. So the racism against Africans everywhere in the world exists, and I think it's due to a fundamental misunderstanding and ignorance on the part of other people who equate dark skin with inferiority, when it should actually, people should be proud of their dark skin because it is more protective. Racism is the result of ignorance and fear, but it is all over the world, and everybody thinks that the darker you are, the more inferior you must be, when nothing is farther from the truth.
Let me pick it up from there. Caroline, I've heard from some Africans in the UK, for instance, who continually say that racism in the UK is institutionalized. Give us a sense of what it is like for an African seeking better prospects in the UK.
Well, I personally, because I know people talk about racism a lot in the UK, so I was expecting that to happen to me. However, honestly speaking, I never ever experienced racism in the UK. I felt like the discrimination was more against Africans with each other. However, when it comes to opportunities, I think it's all out there in the table. Like if you're applying for a job in the UK, it already states the requirements, how much the job will pay, not like here. So I think it's fair play. However, when it comes to now, the problem is when you go for your interview, the first thing they will look at is your residence. So if you're, for example, on a post-study work visa 2 years, even if you've qualified for that job, however, your stay in the UK is, for example, they'll be required to sponsor you back, then it's very unfortunate that even with your qualifications, they don't take you for that job. So at the moment, especially right now, the rules are really strict in terms of for immigrants right now. So they're just trying to reduce the number of people actually holding onto these jobs in the UK. So I can say that the competition right now is really stiff, and it's hard to secure something that is really of quality.
Raphael, are the challenges similar in the US or are they different to what Caroline is talking about?
They're more or less similar. If you look at a country like the United States, there are different generations of people and different groupings of people. And most importantly, they are African Americans. And African Americans tend to actually even discriminate Africans more than the whites themselves. Why? Because they always feel that you're coming in to take up opportunities that belong to them. And that becomes a major, major, major challenge. So it is not as loud. They won't say it, but they'll do things that make you realize that no, you don't belong. So the sense of belonging is something that really makes you feel so much out of place and miss home. So to create home away from home becomes extremely, extremely, extremely difficult. And so I think it becomes a big, big challenge for Africans who are trying to seek opportunities outside. Nonetheless, like Caro did say, the system is such that it tries to create some sort of fairness, so that if it is salary, I mean, if it's a matter of salaries, they're already set. So someone won't say, because you are an African, you're going to get less remuneration. Provided you have the requirements that are, the requirements, then chances are if you get that opportunity, you will get compensation and remuneration as much as someone else who is not of your ethnic group or your background would get. But discrimination and segregation does exist.
All right, so is the dream bigger and better abroad? That's the conversation on Talk Africa here today. We have Mr. Nii Akwete in Washington with us. We have here in studio Caroline Nyandong and Raphael Obonyo. We will be right back after this short break. Welcome back. Every dark cloud, they say, has a silver lining. So while many Africans are drawn by the prospect of better life abroad, more and more are also returning home. So just why is that so? Still with us from Washington, D.C. is Mr. Nii Akwete, and in studio are Caroline Nyandong and Raphael Obonyo. Thank you for still being with us here in studio. Mr. Akwete, let me come to you once again. Now, some figures claim that Africa gains $20 billion annually in remittances from Africans in the diaspora. That's obviously more than foreign direct investment the continent gets annually. With this in mind, are African governments really keen on having their people back home?
I think that is, I think the response of African governments, my guess is that it is complicated. It's sort of a yes and no answer. But of course, I have been, I'm an immigrant in the U.S. I try to keep up with the continent, but the government officials will be in better positions to answer this question. But I can offer my opinion. I do think that they want the things that so many African brains outside can bring to the continent. And I do think that I'm yet to meet any African who has sort of written off the continent. My very first, at the beginning of the show, my first answer was about political conditions back home. That still constrains us to return and contribute as fully as we want. Then that is what the African governments need to do. So I'm saying, yes, I think on the one hand, they want us to come back. And if you look at the African Union, it has even decided, it has a big push now on the diaspora. They want to make Africans outside Africa a fifth region of the continent. So the rhetoric is there, the official policy is there, the implementation is a little difficult. And also, when we come back, from their point of view, we learn a number of bad habits. We like to talk back. We are independent-minded. We look at the government as our servants because that's how the developed countries look at it. I've had people in Ghana, when I returned, say to me, listen, you've lost your respect for people in authority. You keep challenging authority. So I think largely they want us back. Sometimes they think that we are a little bit hard to handle.
Well, Raphael, why did you come back home?
I came back home because for you to hack outside, for you to, make headways outside the country and in a foreign country, you have to be better than the best. You really have to prove that yourself that, yes, I'm African, but I can also do it like you're doing it here. So it's a huge challenge. The second thing, I realized that the skills and whatever capacity I'd earned through my education, they would better be employed here than outside. But I thought what I've gained, because Africa and Kenya in particular is still developing, it is easier for me to make it here and become even a star here than I would in the US. People have done everything in the US. So if you're trying to do it, really you need to do it in a cutting edge style. So it's very, very, very difficult. The second thing is the issue of milk and honey. When you're coming back, you have to carry milk and honey that the impression that you created that you're going to the land of milk and honey. If you don't have that, no one will receive you at the airport. In fact, people will keep asking you, why did you come back? The third thing why sometimes people find it difficult to come is once you get abroad in a country like States, once you get your first job, people struggle the first years and you do so many jobs, and once you get to your initial monies, people take mortgages. Once you take that mortgage, for the next 20 years, you'll say, I'll be going home in 2 years. And you have to keep paying before you realize you can't save enough to go back. So that keeps restricting you from coming back. So those are the kind of challenges that stop people from coming back. Otherwise, many people would want to actually come back and make a contribution to their country.
Caroline, are you glad you came back home?
Oh my God, you have no idea. I'm really glad. I'm grateful for the experience, because what I learned going to the UK, it's built me as a person. However, I realized, fine, it has a system that works, so you don't get frustrated. However, the depression sinks in. But the opposite, when you come home, you're not really depressed because you've got family around, you've got friends, you've got good weather, but our system totally failed. And being in the UK, I realized that for me to actually achieve my goals, it would take me longer, because I've come back home and things are really working out for me. And then last but not least, being a woman, I'm more likely to get a husband here than get a husband in the UK. So I'm glad. Now there are prospects.
That's really an interesting factor. Ms. Akwete, let me come to you. Once again, I've got to give you the hard statistics. Now, I did, of course, speak it somewhere that to fill the gap caused by this, brain drain in Africa, that Africa employs up to 150,000 expatriates professionals at a cost of $4 billion annually. And the question is, isn't this money that can be used by African governments to uplift the economy and in so doing create opportunities for the young skilled professionals in the continent?
I think the short answer to that is yes, and it is a great question. But of course, the devil is in the details. If that is something that we should do, use that money to create conditions not just for well-trained Africans abroad, as my brother in the studio said, to perform at the same level with, to hold the same kind of job in the abroad, outside Africa, whether it's UK or the United States, you have to be much, much better. The African Americans say that, you know, if you are black, you have to be 3 times as good to be given the same job. So what I'm saying is that the Africans who have been abroad and worked and have gained experience are excellent. And in fact, I'll be blunt and tell you that they are much better than the non-Africans who the international agencies and even our governments hire at exorbitant cost to bring back home. It is something we have to correct. So we, the Africans who have left, as well as our governments, we have to work with them, because frankly, I think that if you want somebody in my line of work, I will hold myself out against any non-African, and I think I'll be better. One of the things I used to do is I used to teach at Georgetown. So sometimes I tell them, listen, I used to teach you in your own system, and I know Africa also better than you do. So I think you are so right that we need to take that money to hire our own people back. But I think, you know, what Caroline, my sister in the studio, said is on point. The good things about Africa are the natural things, good weather, family, and all that. Where we have problems are the man-made systems. And it makes me an optimist. Most times when I'm in a group, I'm the gray-haired old man there, but I happen to be the most optimistic, because I'm saying if you know our history and see what we have overcome, what is left to do is important, but it's far less difficult than before. So it is up to change and make the systems better. For instance, make sure that it is the Africans outside who understand Africa who are hired to come back. I told someone who was arguing with me about Africa, I said, listen, you have to learn about Africa. I don't have to learn about Africa because I am Africa.
All right. Some interesting perspectives from Mr. Akwete. Very briefly, back to you, Raphael and Carol. First with you, Raphael. You did talk about Kenya before you left and how things were. Have things changed? Do you think that the landscape in the country is better now than it was before you left?
I think I would say Kenya is in transition to where, I don't know. That's what I'm not sure about, whether we are because we keep moving forward and moving backward almost at the same pace, you know. So it's quite unfortunate, both in terms of politics, economically, and even socially. And I've argued, for example, corruption is quite pervasive in many of our countries in Africa, something that we really need to deal with. So that for you to get anything, you need to pay a bribe. You know, you've gone through school. I mean, I didn't have a bald head before I went for my master's. Now I have a bald head. You can imagine if I want to get a job now. I lost my hair already at school. I come back, I'm looking for a job. Someone still wants me to pay bribe. You know, such kind of very painful experiences can put you off. So I think we need to deal with some of these challenges to be able to attract many more Africans who are away and who are leaving the continent.
Right, and Caroline, finally, let's talk about what you think African governments can do to attract these Africans in the diaspora back home.
I'll speak first of all from my personal experience, because when I was moving back, I had been debating about it for a year. I feel like the diaspora, they're really neglected in terms of you want to move back home, but there's no one holding your hand. So you're there, you're trying to apply for a job, but you don't even get a confirmation of receipt that, yes, we have received your application. So you're contemplating coming back, but you don't know, once you come back, how do you go about it? So I think the government really needs to figure out a way to be able to invest in the people who are looking to come back, because think about it, they're coming back with skills, with exposure. These are people that can actually help in developing the country because they've seen how the West do it. But I have this feeling whereby even from the interviews that I've gone, when they hear that you're from the West, they get scared. The salaries here are honestly unspeakable. It's very, very frustrating. So I think that we really, really need to look into our system and restructure it and ensure that it works, because the diaspora, they would actually come and build our economy, but nothing is being done to invest in them at all.
All right. It's been an interesting conversation. Thank you all for being with us. Mr. Ni Akwete in Washington, D.C. Here in studio, Caroline Nyandong and Raphael Obonyo. Thank you once again for being with us on Talk Africa. This is Talk Africa for this week. I'm Penina Karibe. Thank you.